This show is produced by the Hartman Media Company. For more information and links to all our great podcasts, visit hartmanmedia.com.
Welcome to the Holistic Survival Show with Jason Hartman. The economic storm brewing around the world is set to spill into all aspects of our lives. Are you prepared? Where are you going to turn for the critical life skills necessary to survive and prosper? The Holistic Survival Show is your family's insurance for a better life. Jason will teach you to think independently, to understand threats, and how to create the ultimate action plan. Sudden change or worst case scenario, you'll be ready. Welcome to Holistic Survival, your key resource for protecting the people, places, and profits you care about in uncertain times. Ladies and gentlemen, your host, Jason Hartman.
Thank you for joining us today for part 2 of the last episode. Well, as they say, the Second Amendment is the amendment that makes the First Amendment possible. That's the old saying on that. Do you think we will see any kind of real type of secession movements or anything like that? I mean, we've seen these over the years. You've heard inklings of them. 20 years ago, I was predicting that, if we live our full natural lives, we will definitely see secession happening. But the interesting thing is, in today's world, I don't know if it would really be state by state, like in a geographical way. I sort of wonder if there's maybe we're already really seeing that because, people are voting with their feet and they're, moving all around the world. But do you think we could actually see some states secede from the Union or parts of states? Or
I think you're really touching on something here that I do in the book, in the Authoritarians, and that is that we really are in a pre-Civil War kind of an environment. There are many parallels to be drawn between our circumstances now and what was bleeding Kansas in 1850 before the Civil War in 1860. There you had, in microcosm, the Civil War in Kansas. And I think we see these civil wars taking place across the country in urban areas where people are being forced to defend their property and their lives against the onslaught that is there. And your point about people moving with their feet, voting with their feet, is actually very much the case, so that this mass migration, internal migration of Americans away from cities like New York and cities in California, the entire state of California, Washington State, Oregon, moving internally into Idaho, Montana, South Dakota, North Dakota, Texas, Florida, all of this migration, which is changing the demographics such that even the number of members of Congress from blue states are going down and the number of members of Congress for red states is going up.
California just lost a seat for I think the first time in its history. That's amazing.
So we're seeing whether the political environment in this country is capable of arresting the extraordinary socialist destruction of Republican governments that is underway. And people will be voting, and I think they will be voting in large numbers in 2022. And I believe that we're going to see a Republican majority arise in the House and the Senate. And I think in 2024, that trend will likely continue. And I suspect that, barring some unforeseen circumstance, that a Republican will replace Biden in the White House. And these Republicans are going to be different than Republicans that we have seen in the distant past, within our lifetimes, though, for those of us who are 60 or thereabouts. But these are going to be individuals who are going to be committed to restoring constitutional strictures on government power. We've seen this happen with the Supreme Court recently. In its decision, in its most recent case, it has denied the government an assumption of power. In the case of the Federal Trade Commission, the Federal Trade Commission have been operating through Republican and Democratic administrations alike with confiscatory power nowhere given to them in the enabling statute for the FTC. So they would have disgorgement and they would take people's money as part of their own assessment, a judgment against a party. And the Supreme Court held that they had no such power and that therefore there was no statutory basis for it, and they struck it. And that was a 9-0 decision, remarkable. And
wow.
And so I suspect that this is another bellwether of what's to come. The good news is the light at the end of the tunnel. I do suspect that we are going to see more effort than has ever happened in our lifetimes to restore the Constitution, to return limits on government power that have been a constitution in exile since the administrative state arose in the 1880s. So that's the good news.
Yeah, you know what's interesting about the voting with the feet and this mass migration that's going on is that outside of some woke tech companies and, woke Hollywood, or the entertainment industry in general, I guess I should say, the real economy is run by people that generally vote to the right. They run most of the small businesses. They're hard workers. When places like New York City and California, I could call it the Socialist Republic of California and New York, they're just going to lose their tax base. I mean, they're going to be in trouble. Now, Biden's administration will bail them out, but this problem could last for decades.
The extreme liberalism of the Biden administration is quite remarkable because we have a socialist president. People thought they elected a moderate, but what they have is a socialist president. And they have a socialist Congress. A majority of Congress is now socialist in its orientation on legislation. They won't admit themselves to be socialists unless they're members of the Squad or some other minority in Congress, political minority. But what I suspect is going to happen is a major backlash because the destruction of the fossil fuel industry, for example, the very backbone of the free market system in the United States, is not going to go by without consequence, political consequence. And they understand that. So they're trying to rush through as much legislation as possible before 2022 that establishes a socialist state in the United States. But the states are objecting. They're filing suits against the federal government. The oil and gas industry has been decimated by much of this. You take, for example, the state of New Mexico. The destruction of the fossil fuel industry and allowing leasing on federal land to extract fuel has been devastating to their economy, which has been heavily dependent upon the revenues derived from those highly lucrative activities. And so something like 40 to 60% of the revenue of the state is gone as a result of Biden's executive order. The executive order itself is another socialist move because the Constitution would have compelled that to be passed by legislation. But Biden just took the power in violation of the separation of powers and acted as if he were a dictator. He's destroyed leasing on federal lands of oil and gas with no explanation. He has wiped out entirely the Keystone XL pipeline.
Well, look, I mean, think about it. On one stroke there, he got to put a bunch of Republican workers on the unemployment line, destroy a bunch of Republican companies, and then he got to inflate gasoline prices for a bunch of Democrat voters who don't understand how inflation works and how supply and demand and how the economy works. So they're instantly going to need to be taken care of by the government more because he's impoverishing people. I mean, it's and making them all more dependent on government.
Climate change agenda would call for the end of fossil fuels. It would call for the elimination of gasoline.
Yeah, I'm sure every immigrant gardener can just afford a new Tesla, right? They could just buy a Tesla. Yeah,
absolutely. It's not out of a concern, not one whit of a concern about the welfare of individuals that this is driven by. It's driven by this fanatical socialist green agenda where the whole idea is unscientific and contrary to the basic engineering principles about energy. The energy industry laughs at the idea that you could run this country with reliable sources of energy on solar and wind when those are two unreliable sources of energy that cannot even function without heavy state subsidization. The cost of the energy generated by oil and gas is multiple times that of natural gas. And the effect of relying on it is to destroy an economy. And that's basically what they're about. They don't want a Western society to exist in the United States. They want to kick us back to the Stone Age. They don't want air conditioning. They don't want central heating. They don't want skyscrapers in the cities. They don't want to have anything.
Well, they want skyscrapers as long as they can compact people together and control them better. But go ahead.
Like that.
Yeah.
But one of the things, the solar and wind energy, environmental consequences of that are extraordinary, and they completely ignore them. I mean, to take up the amount of land necessary to have these giant farms for solar and wind would wipe out a huge swath of the entire United States dedicated, instead of to farming and agriculture and to the wildlife, to these things. And, windmills chop up all sorts of flying animals when they actually function. They've been a horrible thing in Europe. They've killed bat populations, bird populations have been decimated by these things. And yet they have no regard for that whatsoever. That's not a concern in the least. And it's because, as the chief of staff to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez admitted, that really it's not about the climate. It's not about the environment. It's all about socialism. That's what it's really about. It's to come up with a Trojan horse to deliver socialism. So you tell everybody the world's coming to an end based on the oceans rising. And then you tell them the only solution is you give up your car, you give up fossil fuels, you don't have energy from...
And become more dependent on government. That's the bottom line goal of everything. Take mass transit, you don't have a car, be part of the collective. Well, Jonathan, it's always interesting to talk to you. Let's hope there's a turnaround. We're going to see a generational shift here now with Gen Z. We know what the millennials are like. We don't know what Gen Z is like yet. Maybe the cultural shift will occur and things will swing back to, a center point of reasonableness. Who knows? We'll see.
I would rather defend my freedom and have it than have it taken away and then resent for the rest of my life the fact that I didn't defend it. So I'm hoping that these youth will come to realize that there's nothing more precious about being an American than to be free, and that liberty is the defining characteristic of what it means to be an American. The rest of the world comes here because here you can be free. If we take the last bastion of defense of individual liberty out of the world, then we will be forever miserable, because there is no joy in being a slave to the state. There's only misery. And everybody else in the rest of the world understands that.
They sure do. And you see that in South Florida with the Cuban population. One would think they would vote for Democrats because they're a minority, right? No, they get it. They know what communism is like and how much it sucks, and they don't want to go anywhere near that. And so, the rest of the world understands this stuff. But, people who didn't grow up in it, didn't witness it, they don't get it. Sadly, we have a generation that is going to be running the world soon who really didn't know what hardship was. They were the most catered to generation in human history. The only way they can get it is from history books, but history's been revised by the government-run school system and the leftist indoctrinated universities. So how would they know any different, right?
Right.
The book is The Authoritarians, Their Assault on Individual Liberty, the Constitution, and Free Enterprise from the 19th Century to the Present. Jonathan Emord, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.